All right, so second half, let's talk about a couple of utilities you may want to use. One of them is called the remap HSV utility. It lets you remap the hue, saturation, and value from an output, being a texture, a file texture you get. For instance, the example here, I took a plaid checker tablecloth. The default red in it is really vibrant, way too vibrant for the environment. It looks artificial. In fact, a lot of times you will find textures that you get off the internet, the JPEG process, the compression process, sometimes the camera they used to take it, colors will be oversaturated. And when you compare them to what you see in the real world or images you may take on your phone, cameras tend to saturate images a little bit sometimes. So what we can do is we can use this utility, and basically it's a very simple input-output kind of thing. You take the output of your file node, which is out color, it goes into the color channel of the remap HSV, and take your out color, and that goes back into your material. And all you're doing is passing your texture through this utility that will allow you to remap either hue, saturation, and or value. The only thing we really use it for is desaturating. You can use it to remap the hue, which gets some interesting results, depending on what you've got. So let's take a look. I'm going to bring up Maya and load in the interior scene, since most of you are doing that. So let's do this. There we go. All right, so I'll take my cushion here. And let's see what this looks like if I throw a texture on it. Okay. So I'm going to go under the assumption, let me get my file in there. And let's see what we have. Something that's really oversaturated and just... So there's my tablecloth. That ought to look pretty good. All right, so yeah, there we go. Looks like somebody went to a restaurant, stole the tablecloth, and then put it on their cushion. All right, now, I can do this without rendering it because I'll get the same effect. I've got enough information in the viewport where I can just look at it in hardware view. All right, so most of the time something like this will come in oversaturated. When you render it out, depending on your lighting, this is nighttime, so it's not going to be as bad as it would during the day with a lot of direct light on it. But if it comes in and it is way too dominant as far as the color goes, we can go in and adjust that. So I'm going to graph my network in the hypershade. All right, so chair cushion, graph my network, there it is. So I have my tablecloth texture going right into diffuse. So everything that is a utility is under the section at the top of the create area called Maya. All right, and it's all well, it used to be alphabetical, but it's not anymore. So it's under utilities. But the good news is the utilities themselves are alphabetized. Meaning if you want remap HSV, you go down to the R's. So here we go. Remap color, remap HSV, remap value. We want HSV because then you have separate control over hue, saturation, and value. So all I have to do is click that. That comes up with a disconnected utility. I take my file node, the out color, and put it into the color. That's basically the input on the left side. Goes into the remap. Take out color from the remap, that's the output, and put that into the material. So now all I've done is, what? Get in there. There we go. All I've done is reroute that tablecloth through the remap. And by default, nothing should look different because the default values for the remap are whatever comes in from the material or the texture. Now to access it, select the utility and go into the attributes. And you'll see that you have a separate hue, saturation, and value section, and you get this little graph. Looks like a little curve in Photoshop. Now, under saturation, the saturation level goes from 0 on the left side, and it's a linear line. It goes straight up to basically 1 in the upper right corner. That just means it is the default color that it comes in at. If I want to desaturate it, I take the upper right part of the curve, and you'll notice when you select it, it's got a little dot on the end of it. If I drag that down, that will start to desaturate the color. Most of the time, just knocking it down a little bit is enough to really fix any kind of vibrance issues you might have, where something looks like it's just vibrating too loudly next to something else. But you have free reign. Now, if you have a texture that comes in and you need it to be deeper, richer, or maybe you want value in it, you can do that here under the value section. So right now, I could take and drag that value down from being 1, which is the default value in the texture itself, drag it down, and then have it have more shadow in it if I wanted to. All right, now, the fun part is hue. I'm not saying you should do this, but you can. So theoretically, you can change the color just by dragging that. And all it's going to do is just kind of go through 0, where it's at is the default color it comes in at. And any other number that you drag it through is like that color wheel in the color picker or the slider. It just goes through all the different colors. Think of 0 as being the default color. And if you go all the way down, it'll wind up back at 0 again because it's 360 degrees. So good for proof of concept. I wouldn't do this for a permanent texture. But if you're working and the client comes in and goes, what would that look like if it were yellow instead? And you go, well, sort of, there you go. Or it would look like teal or blue. Right. Does that make sense? Questions? So real good for just knocking down the saturation level of textures. So come up, start getting critiques, usually next lab or even this one coming up. You know, if Ari or Frank says, hey, it looks good, but you know, your tablecloth or your chairs are a little too saturated, knock them down. this is an option you can use to knock down the saturation level. Now, you can always take the original texture into Photoshop and do it in Photoshop. But this is a good way of working with the utilities to get a feel for some of the extra stuff that they can do. All right, questions? All right. So there is a reverse utility as well. Reverse utility is sort of like that invert button down in the file node under effects. What it will do is take black, flip it to white, white, flip it to black, or any of your colors and flip them to the opposite direction. Now, sometimes I like to do this rather than use the invert button, because if I have a texture going into two different channels, and if I invert it, it's going to invert it in both channels. Whereas if I wanted to go in, say, black and white into the diffuse, but I want the opposite reflectivity or roughness level, if I hit invert, it's going to do the same thing to both. Whereas if I take this utility, drop it into the roughness, and put this reverse utility through the roughness before it goes to the material, then I can get the reverse of what I want without adjusting anything. Does that make sense? So let's see. Trying to think if there is a. All right. So what I want to do is kind of go over with you the procedure for putting in the AAA logo on the thermos. Because most of you, everybody but Ashlyn is doing the interior scene. All right, so first off, you want to get reference. And we did give you reference in Project 6. So if I go to Project 6, maybe I still have my reference here. There it is, thermos reference. So the logo is halfway up the body of the bottle. It takes up about a good 3/4 to 7/8 of the side of it when you look at it. A little bit of space here, but it's dead center in the body. So logo we give you should match it pretty well. It's just a matter of getting it to be assigned to the bottle and getting it basically the right way. All right, so we did go over a little bit on how to use a projection. There are other types of projections other than that planar projection, which you get by default. Now, what shape is the thermos? Cylindrical. So there are other projection models that you just changed, and that's in the projection node itself. You change it from planar, in this case, to cylindrical. That way, the logo will wrap around properly, rather than just looking like it's projected straight on and just kind of falling around and stretching on the sides a little. It's a subtle difference, but it does give you a much more accurate result. All right. Ooh, my coffee cup is dirty inside. Okay. So there is my Pixar surface. I've got my stainless steel anisotropic material assigned to it. It should look sort of accurate, even in low levels of light. All right, so there's my glass. You can see I got reflections in there. I got the stretched highlight. That's good enough. All right, so my diffuse gain is turned off. So we can't use the diffuse channel to project the logo. It's not going to show up. I mean, you could put it in there, but then you'll bang your head on the wall trying to figure out why isn't it showing up. And everything you do, it won't show up. All right, so what we need to do is this will go into the edge color of the bottle, of the material. Since it's physical, edge color is our primary visibility. Now, how it reflects is controlled by refraction index, extinction coefficient. The good news about this logo is it's black. Black on stainless steel. Which means our logo, by default, happens to be black background, or sorry, black logo, white background. Now, what color is the edge color of our bottle? Stainless steel. It's going to be white, right? So the white background works out really well because that can fill in, instead of using a layered texture, that is automatically going to be the right thing that we see. And that's the only reason it works this way, is because it's a black logo with a white background. We need white to get the edge color, and our logo color needs to be black. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my diffuse and just make that color black, just in case, even though I've got the gain off, and when I knock out that logo shape in the edge color, I don't want to have any chance that no matter how small that chance is, some gray diffuse is going to show through. And if any diffuse does pop through, it's going to be the same color as the logo. Now, the reason I'm doing all this is because after we're done this, then I'll kind of go over with you what you would need to do if the logo were a different color. All right. So, first off, we want to project the logo onto the bottle. Somebody walk me through it. Or a bunch of you can.
So the checker map next to edge color first.
Yep, so edge color, checker button.
Right click file.
Yep, so we're going to right click on File, Create as Projection. So everything's going to turn kind of gray because there's nothing in my file node right now. All right, so under File, this is where we're going to plug in the AAA logo. Right here, the good old JPEG that we give you. So by default, it's going to look like, I don't know, evil minion eyes. Now, there's a good reason that it looks like that. Anybody know why?
Turned or zoomed, but just placement's off.
Okay, well, if you remember when we were playing around with the AAA logo on the plane, where did it drop the placement node for it?
Placed it vertical instead.
Yep, well, it also dropped it in center of the world.
Yeah.
So that's where it's going to drop it in every single time, just like anything default in Maya. If you can't find something, look at the origin. So here I'm going to go to wireframe. There's my grid, and there's my projection. Now my projection is sort of facing the right way. It's just that it's too many units off. And remember, this is repeating in U and V infinitely. So it's going to catch the bottle at some point and give me evil minion eyes, which is what it's doing. Now, what would I need to do normally now?
You would take the projection, put it just facing the thermos.
Yeah, so I would have to translate it, rotate it, place it over manually. Now, in theory, everything in Maya is theoretical. So I have my place 3D selected for my projection. This projection is actually inside there, and this is controlling where that projection goes. All right, so under 3D placement attributes, we have a couple of buttons here. One of these buttons is going to allow us to force fit that projection to the geometry that it's assigned to. That's going to be the fit to group B box. Do you guys know what a B box stands for? Bounding box. Do you know what a bounding box is? Modelers. No. Okay. So a bounding box is used to describe any object in 8 points. Doesn't matter what the shape of it is. So it could be a cube, and it would define 4 points on the top, 4 points on the bottom. Everything inside of that is the space that my cube takes up. Same thing my backpack here. It is not a square, it is a slouchy, lazy bag that doesn't do anything. Right? I can still define it in 8 points. So the very top of it is going to determine where it starts the volume for it. So up here, and then the space that it takes up at the bottom is going to be that, the other 4 points. Everything inside is what this takes up. It's an easy way to keep track of objects with minimal information. In early games, we used to use that for collisions. So you'd have a big kind of awkward bounding box, and when a character walked up to a wall, they wouldn't go through it. But in some games, you could actually see they were like either an inch away from the wall or the elbow went into the wall because the bounding box wasn't quite tight enough around the character or didn't leave enough room. So, clicking this button theoretically should force this over to the bottle and size it to the bottle. And I say theoretically because it doesn't work all the time. Every other month it works in my lectures. Like last month it worked, so this month it should not work. And what I will do is show you how to do it manually when it doesn't. But what I should be able to do is just hit fit to group B box. Oh, see, it worked. All right, so if it didn't work, all you would have, what would happen is it would just get really big and stupid looking at the origin, and then you would have to undo and just translate it over manually. But since it did work, I'm going to go with it. So basically, this is what you would have to do manually if it did not work for you. Now, the fact that it did work makes my job much easier now. All right, so having done that, if I go back to my show texture mode, which is 6, yep, it is stretched. So the nice thing about this is called the interactive placement. So anytime you've got a place 3D node, you can click this button. So if I deselect it and just hit W, and I go, I didn't want to get out of that. Just select it and hit interactive mode. Now you're back. So I'm just going to kind of rough fit it. And anytime I can just go and translate it wherever I want it. Right now that is a planar projection on it. So if I render this out right now from perspective, it should show me this logo on top of everything. Or crash. Either one. Your choice, Maya. There we go. All right, so there they are. All right, so just like the demo we did earlier, we have too many logos. So we want to remove all the logos except the one that takes up the space of the projection. So how do we do that? Yep. So I have to go to Hypershade. And I want the thermos body, which I've got assigned here. There's my projection. There's my logo. It's the place 2D assigned to the logo. Turn off wrap U, wrap V. Now, I've got kind of a gray box on the outside. My silvery kind of stainless steel inside. How do I fix this issue? Yep, so I want to go into my logo, the file node, and where do I go from here? Yep, color balance, default color, what color should it be? What's that?
Should it be no later because it's white.
There you go. So, you know, it's really not a big deal. If you did that and rendered it out, you'd be able to see it and go, oh, okay, I guess I have to go the opposite direction. So now, in theory, when I render this out, it should show single logo, no dark gray box around the outside. All right, so almost there. Thing I'm not really feeling though is the fact that this is a planar against a curved surface, a cylindrical surface. So while it looks okay, it still looks a little distorted. You know, granted, I still need to rescale it because it's a little stretched vertically, but what I want to do is put the proper projection type on there. All right, so to fix that, we go into the projection node itself, go into the attributes, and at the very top, yep, projection type, you want to change it from planar to cylindrical. Now, before I do that, let's get that out of the way so we can see the transformation. Cylindrical. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to have to pull it out a little bit. And let me go to wireframe. You can see it's not quite proportionate. It's kind of squeezed. So right there, that's telling me that I didn't have it scaled correctly, for one thing. Because this should take shape of the bottle and completely surround it. Now, what I could try is interactive placement or fit to group bounding box and see if that would fix it for me with the cylindrical projection. Did it? No, it just did that. So don't do that. What I want to do is scale it manually out there. So I'm just going to bring up my scale tool and just scale it out a little bit. What I want to try to do is get it so it is more proportionate, so it looks more circular, cylindrical, rather than an ellipse. The other one was squashed. Right, so I'm going to bring it out just a little bit more. There we go. Now, if I don't like how this looks, it's not quite ready yet for prime time. It's close. It's close. For one thing, I need to rotate it. How do I know? Well, I want to make sure that logo is facing the camera as much as possible for your final shot. Even though it's about 10 feet away, we should be able to at least see there is a logo on there. Might not be able to read it with the greatest clarity, but it should still be there. Alright, so I'm going to go back to perspective. I'm going to rotate this around a little. And what I want to do is go back to my interactive placement and start scaling it in. And what I want to try to match is this. So it looks a little smaller. All right. Questions about that? Does that make sense? Doing that? So for metal, this is really the only time we use this when it is for metal, when we plug it into the edge color. All right, anybody have any questions, any issues you guys are running into with texturing? Now, I will warn you, it's going to be really hard. If you're doing an IPR, it's going to be really hard to read that type or even read the logo itself because it's going to be so grainy. If you really want to test it out, I would suggest you do a render current frame and turn it up to your, render settings before you would batch render. See what it looks like. So let's see if this will hold up. And there we go. Oh, wrong one. Okay. Always remember you have to put it into the render cam before you render current frame. All right, questions about anything? No? All right, treat this as, let's treat this last like 50 minutes like a lab. So work on your stuff. If you have questions, bring them up. Be happy to help you take a look at it. And I'm going to render out the first couple parts of lecture. Once this is done,